Good morning, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us for today's Lunch and Learn. Today we're being joined by Andrew Sutty from Stratify Legal and David Midwood from bodycorporate.com.au. And we're going to be discussing the new legislation and some of the changes. Today we're focusing on smoking and administration arrangements. My name's Angela, and I'll begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the Yuragera country on which we're hosting this webinar, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders peoples here today. I'd also like to extend our thanks to our sponsors. We've got Macquarie Bank, BCB, Stratomax, Todmans, Containers for Change, Express Glass, Strata Community Insurance, Grace Lawyers, altogether, Hum Energy, Productive and BuildCheck. Without them, we couldn't play the role that we do to foster a stronger and more knowledgeable community. So thank you for making a significant impact on the journey of knowledge and professional development. Now, just a quick little housekeeping before we start. For CPD purposes, if you are screen sharing, if you can send an email to education.qld@strata.community, if you can send that within 7 days, and we can get your points all organised for CPD. But if you make sure that you get them back to us within the 7 days. Now, without further ado, I will pass over to Andrew, and I'll just make sure that Andrew can control the screen. And we'll pass over the presentation, but thanks very much.
Thanks, Angela. Let me see if this is working. Yes, cool. Technology. It's on my side. Hi, everyone. Welcome to what is part one of a three-part series about the legislative changes that we're all excited about that are commencing from 1st of May. I'm glad that we're doing this one and not termination, because I think that would be a very long lunch. I was thinking of a later time slot, and we could call it binge and whinge, or maybe booze and schmooze, and that's why I kept my wine fridge in focus behind me today. But don't get too excited. I'm also disappointed that I can't see you all, because I would have liked to have. Why did that move by itself? No, come back. Is someone else controlling my... Oh, there we go. We'll just leave that there. Sorry for these technical issues. I'd also like to introduce my assistant today, Mr. David Midwood. How are you, David?
Very good afternoon to you. The clock has just ticked over, and yes, I'm going for booze and smoosh.
Yeah, I like the booze and schmooze option. David, if you don't know him, is a esteemed senior body corporate manager, and he'll be answering everything that I can't. So over to you, David. Just kidding. So today we're going to be talking about smoking. I'm pretty sure you're all over it, but we'll have a little look at the specific things that are changing, and then some administrative changes that affect us. And David pointed out that I have forgotten off these slides the code of conduct changes, so we'll briefly discuss those as well at the end, if we remember. So smoking first. There we go. Okay, I have control. Smoking hasn't really changed. And when I say that, it's because you would have seen that decision of Ingrid Roseman's a couple of years ago now, Artique on the Gold Coast. And that sort of started where we're at now, insofar as bodies corporate feel as though they can regulate smoking better than they did before. And the basis of that hasn't been through bylaws, it's been through the nuisance provisions of the Act. And so Ingrid decided that in order to prevent the person smoking from downstairs at every hour of the day and annoying the neighbours, she interpreted that as being a hazard because of the health effects on the neighbours from smoke. So, although there haven't been any, she didn't rely on any bylaws in that decision. She just relied on those nuisance provisions of the Act. But since then, we've been relying on that decision ourselves to draft new bylaws to help better regulate smoking, particularly in outdoor areas on a lot. So there have already been a lot of changes in CMSs since that decision was made, albeit those changes may be invalid. In short, because the legislation doesn't allow us to prohibit smoking specifically. So what these changes to the Act do is, one, they give a retrospective approval to those dodgy-ish bylaws that we've already inserted in CMSs before the 1st of May, to the extent that they are consistent with these changes. So the changes, they specifically amend the nuisance provisions to include smoking as one of the nuisance examples, where someone's being exposed to secondhand smoke by another lot owner or occupier on a regular basis. But it also goes further and allows us to incorporate bylaws that prohibit or restrict smoking on all or part of the common property other than exclusive use areas, and to prohibit or restrict smoking on all parts of outdoor areas, either on the common property or on a lot. And that's including exclusive use areas. So that all makes sense. I think it's fairly consistent with what we've already been doing. It now specifically allows us to adopt a bylaw that is consistent with those provisions. And if we don't have a bylaw that's consistent with those provisions, we can still rely on those nuisance provisions from that TEAC decision. Of course, everyone's saying, oh, 1st of May is coming up. Everyone change your bylaws so that you can make the most of these provisions. I'm not sure that that's going to be the case across the board. Towing, we're not talking about towing today, but Jessica and Duncan, when they talk about towing, are going to tell you what you can and can't do in relation to those parking bylaws. But in my view, you don't really need to change those bylaws, and you can simply rely on the changes to the Act to tow vehicles and implement an internal policy in relation to towing. But Jessica and Duncan will tell you more about that in part 2 or 3 of this little Lunch and Learn series. Pets. Again, I don't want to jump in on their presentation, but I also think that the laws about pets in the new Act are really just catching up to what we already know through 20 years of adjudicators' decisions. So, and I think generally these changes are catching up to what we already know, particularly in relation to smoking and pets. Anyway, David, is there anything that you wanted to say about smoking before I move on to administrative matters?
Sure. Happy to have a look at the practical side of it I'm not going to get into the pros and cons of the solicitors of what they think is valid and what will be overridden in future court cases. But from the practical aspect, with respect to smoking, we've all, as body corporate managers at the coalface, we've all come up against cases that have had it, but some key points to have a look at it for where it applies to it. Yes, we're looking at the nuisance provisions there, but we're looking at either transient or secondhand smoke. Smoking includes vaping, so those who are trying to downscale from smoking onto vaping, and it is on a regular basis. In other words, the person who rings up when it's the first offence and it's time for the friendly advice letter rather than throwing the books at them, they're put in place there. On the flip side, I'm going to say with respect to updating the bylaws, irrespective of what of the legal enforcement of it, from a practical point of view, updating the bylaws announces it and makes it very clear and very public to all of their membership that they've gone through this process of updating and adapting their bylaws to accept about prohibiting and restricting it on common parts of the body corporate. So they're the feedback from the practical side of it. Those of you who've interpreted already that you can prohibit it from common property other than exclusive use areas have worked out which part of exclusive use is not outdoor, and that turns out to be the car space in the underground car park. So we can all sit down there and have our exclusive use areas for our underground car park and sit in a circle and have our smokes for those who really want to indulge and go to that extent. But as I understand it, that's the only hole in the floor there. So that'll set up a few sprinklers, I'm sure.
Yep, good point. We've had a body corporate recently come to us and say, yeah, we want to adopt these no smoking bylaws, and this is what we want. And we've allocated this poinciana tree as the smoking spot on the common property, which I thought was a great idea, rather than prohibiting it altogether.
Forward thinking.
If you've got enough space, allocate a specific area for the smoker. Moving along, excuse me. Body corporate seal. You must be happy about this one, David.
Ecstatic, because we've always dragged out the seal when it's come to, the extending of an agreement or the assigning of a caretaking agreement, because that's part of the theatre and the presentation of when one of those are appointed, and you put up the 3 copies in front of the committee, in front of the body corporate, and have them all stamped and sealed and signed as part of demonstrating to everybody the significance and importing of it all. And yes, I've had solicitors tell me for the last 10 years that the Corporations Act at a federal level has deemed them not valid. However, with respect to no longer requiring the corporate seal because they're so easily duplicated for $15 at any decent printer, then yes, this was tidying up a loose end. And so bye-bye on the seals there. I now have for sale a second-hand safe where we store the seals for all of our clients, which are now surplus to requirement.
Yeah, awesome. I think from a practical perspective, you mentioned assignments, for example. When you've got committee members who are living around the state or around the country, around the world, this will make it a lot more streamlined to get documents executed. They should theoretically be at your office, witnessing the affixation of the seal to the document. But of course, that doesn't happen all the time, I know. So yeah, this will just make things a lot easier and catching up, to the Corporations Act and the rest of the world. So you're going to have a sacrificial burning of your body corporate seals. Bye-bye, baby.
After the 1st of May.
Don't do it now. Excuse me. So there's a change to allow us bodies corporate to change their financial year internally. Previously, and well, currently, if you want to apply for a change of the financial year, as you know, you need to apply for an order of an adjudicator, and that's obviously clogging up the Commissioner's office unnecessarily. So now these provisions allow us to make one change to our financial year under the authority of an ordinary resolution at a general meeting, but we can only do it every 5 years. That makes sense to me.
Makes good sense.
Yeah, just common sense.
Reasons as to why a body corporate would want to change its financial year. I know we've done it for clients whose financial year ended on the 31st of December, not because it wasn't a bad financial year or none of us were in the office to be able to roll over the accounts at all, but because it usually correlates with the insurance and the timing of the insurance. And so for those bodies corporates that want to do so, even though you can change your insurance to roll over, you don't want to try and renew insurance on 31 December because none of the decision makers in order to negotiate better rates are in their offices. They're all away on Christmas leave. So if one year you can roll the insurance around for 13 months to renew on the 31st of January, and then you'll get those that want to coordinate it with their financial year and putting that in place. There are other reasons too.
Yeah. Address for service. Whoops.
Andrew, before we jump on that, can I go back to a question from the previous one about the seals coming from Rebecca?
Oh, yeah.
Does the removal of the seal mean that the CMS has will be allowed to be signed electronically? Andrew.
I don't know what the answer to that question is, but at the moment, no. But I would hope that soon the answer would be yes, because people ask me that question almost on a weekly basis. But even though we've got the ability to lodge those CMSs electronically, there's still a requirement for wet signatures to be on those documents at the moment. But as soon as that happens, yeah, things will be even easier. And yeah, catching up to the rest of the world, which is what we always seem to be doing. Remembering that these changes were first proposed 12 years ago. I remember sitting down with the then president and the attorney general, just chatting through these issues, and a lot of them, the attorney general said, "Oh, look, we'll be able to rubber stamp these straight through, these administrative ones, because they're just not, controversial." We said, "Great." So this is it. We've rushed them through 12 years later. Yeah. Anyway, yeah. So it's a bit of catch up. Moving along, we've got some changes to the address for service. So if we, as a body corporate manager, takes on a new building, we've got 30 days to register our change of address. Sorry.
Form 14.
Yeah,
I think it is.
That's right. Yep. General consent. And if the registrar doesn't receive notification, at the moment, the default position is that the developer's address is the default address for service of the body corporate, but now it's the address of the scheme land, which again just makes common sense. Excuse me. Layered schemes. Now, without going into too much detail about all of this right now, the reason that this came up was because in a layered arrangement, there's been no general access between subsidiary schemes and the principal scheme to get copies of records, to access the records. And there's also been complaints about the ability, for example, of a person in a subsidiary scheme commencing a dispute against a principal body corporate. So everyone's been segregated within that layered scheme in relation to access to records and disputes. That's been broadened. It hasn't been completely open so that, for example, a tenant in one scheme can get access to a different scheme's records. But if there's a dispute involving bylaws, and if, for example, the principal scheme has been asked to take action against a person in a subsidiary scheme, then the principal scheme can get access to that subsidiary scheme's records for the purpose of identifying the perpetrator, so they can give that person a Form 10 or a Form 11. It also allows owners or occupiers in one subsidiary to, again, if there's a bylaw dispute, to obtain records about the perpetrator of the bylaw, so that they can then give the principal scheme or another scheme the Form 1 to kick off that dispute against that person. Generally, owners in subsidiary schemes can now inspect the body corporates, the principal scheme body corporates records, and disputes. The definition of disputes has been widened so that bodies corporate in a subsidiary scheme can have a dispute against another body corporate in the subsidiary scheme, and owners and occupiers of one scheme can have a dispute against owners and occupiers of another scheme, and the body corporate in one scheme can have a dispute against owner-occupiers of other schemes in that layered arrangement. So there's generally more access to information and disputes in those layered schemes. David, have you got any comments in relation to this?
Sometimes these things are never as transparent as they appear to be, in that you get people, yes, it's designed for, there's noise coming out of this body corporate or this lot in an adjoining subsidiary scheme, and their own don't wish to take any action, but we feel as though we do. Then it starts to grow, and you discover that the access or the privilege is being weaponized for unrelated issues they may have between themselves, and it's always cautious as the administrator to sticking to the basic idea of what these access into records of other bodies' corporates are really intentioned and designed to do. I've been caught where I've had access and demanding of supply of records for what seem to be minor, only to find them the information being used for a commercial dispute between the individuals that were unrelated, had nothing to do with anything with the body corporate.
I think that these changes are good changes, and we should be able to access records and to have a dispute about people who are effectively in our scheme, that scheme being the principal scheme. So I think this just fixes the problem that we had before with layered arrangements, because they weren't contemplated under the normal dispute resolution provision. So I think that's going to be a good change. Records. An inspection of records has been changed basically to give more, to acknowledge that records can be shared in different ways, i.e. through platforms, electronic platforms. And it says that if the parties, i.e. if the person requesting the records and the body corporate agree to give access to the records, to allow someone to inspect the records via some platform, then it can be given via that platform. And if they don't agree, it can just be given at a reasonable time and place. So reverting back to what we have now. Same with the giving of records. If the two parties can agree that it's okay for the body corporate to give the records via some platform or in some other way, then that's great. And if not agree, it reverts back to what we're already doing. I'm assuming that, David, I mean, how do you share records at the moment?
Both electronically and face-to-face. Particularly COVID, when it came in place, electronic became the default standard where people were asking for, and particularly search agents or whatever, and quite happy to email copies of the PDF records within it and put that in place there. The key point for me from a practical point of view is that reasonable time and place. Some of the things don't change where you get someone who's decided to, again, weaponize the process and insist that they need more than 3 hours and that they want to stay beyond office hours at 5 p.m. simply to frustrate the administrator because they're not getting the answers they want from their group. So it's a matter of balancing all needs and respecting all the parties that are there. But yes, being able, we've got Plexa opening up for searches and inspections, etc. Email PDF copies that are there. Being able to dial in for those that do have it into the various systems like Stratomax and other software systems that are there, and straightforward where they come in, and particularly the very rare times you get an owner carrying out their own due diligence and you get them come to the office and sit down in front of in the meeting room. And that's how I recruit new committee members, by jumping on there and newfound enthusiasm for their purchase and explaining to them how they can contribute. But on the flip side is where you have individuals in the body corporate to individual lot owners who think that the body corporate manager is at their personal beck and call for their personal secretarial needs, as distinct from the committee's needs, which is what we're applied for.
I'm just not sure that this does what we wanted it to do, other than, it acknowledges that we're going to have technology assisting us with our storage and dissemination of records. But the if agreed thing, and because the agreement is between us and the person searching the records, and a lot of the time the person searching the records is on a fishing expedition, or there's a dispute between them and the body corporate, at least, in the matters that I see, they're just not going to agree. And I think that it would have been better if it was based on, the body corporate resolving that the inspection of records can be by this method, then the owner or the requester of the records has to abide by that rather than having the ability to agree, which then defaults back to where we are now. But in any event, it is what it is. Angela's got a question. How long should access be allowed for electronic access? Good question, Angela. And I suppose because of the words if agreed, then if we, for example, said to that person, we're going to give you access to Property IQ or whatever platform so that you can access these records, we would say, do you agree to access it this way? And in which case we'll put a 2-day, 1-day, 7-day time limit on it. If they agree, then it's agreed. I don't think, well, there is no requirement in legislation, at least, or guidance telling us how long we need to keep that access open. But yeah, I would tie that up in the agreement at the beginning, if possible. Alternative insurance orders. Now, at the moment, we have something similar. The commissioner can grant an order to relieve us of our strict insurance requirements. These provisions change things by allowing an adjudicator to make that decision instead of the commissioner. And there's going to be a new approved form in relation to these types of orders. And in that form, we're going to need to say, this is the type of insurance cover that we want. And these are the grounds upon which we say we should have that order. So the starting point, of course, is that, well, the body corporate can't comply with the insurance obligations in the module for whatever reason. We say we've got cover that's as good as it can be, as good as we can find, without, for example, having to pay $1 million or whatever the case might be. The adjudicator then takes our form and our application, and the adjudicator may consider the number of insurers we have approached to get that cover and the reasons why we don't have the cover, and how much it would actually cost us to comply with the requirements if we can, and can also make that order subject to the body corporate later approving that insurance cover in a general meeting. Have you had problems in the past, David? Have you ever used the existing provisions and obtained an order from the commissioner because a scheme has not been able to comply with the insurance provisions in the module?
This has been a challenge for our colleagues that are in North Queensland and far North Queensland in particular, where insurance coverage and those dreaded words self-insured gets drafted around for bodies corporates that are put in place there. Past commissioner decisions that we've gone through and reviewed have already demonstrated that just because you don't like the commercial terms of what you're being offered doesn't mean that you can use the commissioner's office in order to get into an internal alternative insurance order. Insurance it's a case-by-case basis for each one that's been put in place there. With respect to the insurance, yes, we've had some experience with going off in Lloyd's of London and not using the regular insurers that are in place there and the extraordinary terms that come back in that respect. So it's nice to see that broadly, and correct me if I'm wrong, this one eases it up. So instead of going through and getting a commissioner's order that we'll get one step lower in an adjudicator order, but providing you still need to go through and jump the hoops or be able to demonstrate as to what it is that's been tried, and what the reasons were given for not being able to do so, and jump through those hoops.
Yeah, yeah.
And just because it's expensive doesn't count.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's nice to see that there's a more prescriptive approach now and an acknowledgement that there are problems, and facilitating the ability of bodies corporate to get these alternative coverages. So yeah, I think it's good and reflective of what's happening, particularly in North Queensland. I know that we're slightly over time, but we did promise that we'd mention the code of conduct that I forgot to put in this presentation. It's a requirement for you already, but now for building managers to not influence or to attempt to influence the outcome of a motion held at a body corporate meeting. So we don't know really yet how far that extends. Does it extend to a building manager lobbying owners for a 5-year top-up? Don't know. But there have been, comments. I remember a paper that Chris Irons released when he was the commissioner, talking about, I think it was Chris, talking about being careful if you're a building manager to lobby too hard, because there weren't, specific provisions at that time, but, unduly influencing lot owners, for example, is still part of the code that the building managers are required to comply with. So it's interesting, and it'll be interesting to see how this progresses and how potentially clogs up the commissioner's office at the beginning, because I think a lot of people will be putting up their hand to test what this means.
The code of conduct, of course, there's an existing one for committee. Then we have the two for body corporate manager and for building managers. It's no secret that when it comes up to issues to which a building manager feels a degree of concern, that a number of them choose to lobby their rental pools direct in order to get the outcome they foresee for the group. So being not allowed to attempt and to influence, I have no doubt that the Commissioner's office will be getting applications in that respect. The one party that is not listed as needing a code of conduct is a lot owner. And I know that is, and on that basis, a few of them think that it's Rafferty's rules and they can do what they want. And it would be nice to see some basic courtesy needed. It's unfortunate that it's needed, but in some cases, some people need the basic rules and courtesy of being and participating in part of a group spelt out for them in black and white.
That might be something that you can incorporate into the scheme's bylaws, David.
And administration agreement for the BCM.
Thanks, Angela.
Indeed.
Sorry we went slightly over time.
One quick question came in.
Thank you. Thanks to everyone that came, and thanks very much to Andrew and David for presenting today. If anyone does have, I think there's one other question just popped in.
It was simply
here.
a query about now that we don't need seals, in that case, can we remove it from the SCA admin agreement? I'm sure that'll be looked at after the 1st of May.
Yeah. And so if there is any other questions, if you just want to email education.qld@strata.community, and I can get back to you once I've spoke to Andrew and David. But thanks again, Andrew and David, and thanks for everyone that joined us today.
Thank you.